I finished Satisfactory, from landing on message ABB all the way to delivering the final assembly parts, completely in virtual reality, thanks to the UEVR injection mod as well as the UEVR Enhancement Mod by Dortemur. Hi, my name is Alex and this is Under the Radar, my attempt to showcase mods and experience from the VR world. Today we are landing in Satisfactory VR. Well, the mod itself isn't new, but it caught my attention recently with its 1.0 release. So I bought the game and got hooked immediately. I started my playthrough on the PSVR 2 with the PC adapter, but eventually switched to the Quest 3 with virtual desktop. Sure, the OLED on the PSVR 2 makes the colors more vibrant, which I really like, but overall, Satisfactory isn't a particularly dark game like Outer Wilds. Nighttime and caves have a blue tint, except in the swamp area, so the OLED display never really gets to shine. Also, the mod heavily uses the quit button. On the PSVR 2 controller, it's just a small pad, not ideal for constant interaction. On the Quest 3, it's more like a slider, which feels much more comfortable on the finger when you're using it hundreds of times in a short game time. There are two things you should know. First, this was my first ever playthrough. I watched a few beginner's guides, but in the beginning I had no idea how production change or decent factory architecture worked. So yeah, you see a lot of sloppy spaghetti belts and whatever this is. Second, I recorded my gameplay directly from the game window, so you will see always the HUD and UI full screen. But for me, in virtual reality, it's always floating about 2 meters in front of me, so I can point and interact with it smoothly. Just like the game itself, the mod has a learning curve. I'll cover the most important interactions, but I highly recommend the tutorial video by Dortemur, which I'll link in the description. First and foremost, the biggest addition, aside from the VR camera, are the hands we now have in the world. Left and right hands each come with their own tools for navigation and interaction. Looking at them and tilting them, like a watch, reveals your options. One hand lets you open the menus, like the codex or the map, as well as the access to all your tools. You can also turn on the flashlight this way, or just raise your hand next to your head and click. Where have I seen this gesture before? Oh yeah, Outer Wilds. If you bring your other hand to your head, your inventory opens, like grabbing a backpack. You do get used to the controls eventually, but even I kept clicking the wrong button, opening menus, or accidentally trying to dismantle an entire blueprint instead of a single item. Luckily, this never happened while trying to open my parachute. Oh, and the mod also has a lefty mode for left-handeries.
That went well.
Holding X or B opens radial menus, depending on the context, like scanning, switching build modes between standard and zoop, or accessing the nudge mode. Anyway, the UEVR injection and enhancement mods drop you into the open world, ready to explore and exploit. And you will feel that the second you step out of your spaceship. The world is huge, the scales of the trees, the creatures and especially the buildings is enormous. Factories stretch up several stories tall. The details and animation on the buildings are polished and charming. The first time you place a miner and see it drilling into a node, you'll smile. Standing next to a conveyor belt and watching your goods move from point A to point B is incredibly satisfying. So, how did my playthrough go? Well, pretty straightforward, I think. I was focused on delivering the assembly parts. I played with no other mods installed. The only things I did were turning off the monster aggressiveness and doing a bit of multitasking using the Satisfactory calculator running in the Quest 3 menu. If I do another one, I'd switch my starting area to the desert and turn hostile mobs back on to make things more challenging. I'm not into hardcore survival, but no combat at all was a bit boring and made the run way too easy. In the beginning I did a lot of handcrafting, but once I understood how power and logistics work, I let my factories handle things. Performance-wise, I followed the advice from guides and built modular factories instead of one massive mega base to save on frame rate. So I had buildings in different areas next to resource nodes. And I was really happy the first time I saw my truck doing its thing. And yes, you can drive them. The trucks, the explorer and the factory cart all work in first person. Hypertubes are also in first person, which looks trippy, but I'm pretty immune to motion sickness, and you can go third person too, which makes for a fun ride. And the trains are massive. I only had 2 rail lines, the oil from the south and nitrogen from the north, but I absolutely loved creating my first train intersection after figuring out how clock signals work. Later I switched to drones, which made one line obsolete, but I'll definitely set up more railways in future ones. Exploration wasn't as important as I thought. I started in the rocky desert, which had all the key resources nearby, and there are only 3 types of collectibles in total, and you only need a quarter of them to progress. So going out and wandering around the entire map was never really necessary. Which is kind of a shame. I wish there were more reasons to travel across the whole world and to gather rare resources from far off regions. But these regions off the starting areas are really beautiful. I have not played Avatar yet, but this is how I imagine Pandora will look like. My factory grew and grew. At first I was in the north of a rocky desert, but I needed more space. By the end, I had a specific buildings for each item category, and they all somehow met in the middle of a desert to create the final items for the assembly project. I won't spoil the ending, but I do want to use my free speech here. The ending was disappointing. I really hope they add an endgame DLC or some reasons to keep producing items. Right now, creating stuff just to create more stuff, just to store or sync them for no reason, feels kind of pointless. Only my armory and munitions factory had real use, shooting creatures and blasting away poisonous rocks without limits. After around 150 hours of gameplay, I sent the last assembly parts to the space elevator and saw the credits roll. I'm probably not the first person who did this, since the game and mod have been out for a while, but fun fact, Dortamur, the mod creator, mentioned that he hasn't seen the ending yet, so I can confirm it's fully playable. At the end I did some AFKing, just leaving the headset off while my factories produced the final items, but all movement and interaction was done in VR. There are some minor flaws, but nothing major. The customization screen in the hub is just a 2D panel inside the headset. You can interact with it, but it's not a VR native. And the nobelisks, the grenades, aren't throwable, you just place them in front of you. I got around that by parachuting and placing them mid-air. But later I switched to the gun with explosive ammo and stopped using the grenades altogether. Now let's talk about the big elephant in the room, performance. I played on an RTX 4090 with 64GB of RAM, and the game ran between 75 and 90 frames per second at ultra settings in virtual desktop. In my late game, walking around my open factory field, it was more in the 75 FPS range. Outside busy areas, it was smooth. Interestingly, if you go inside buildings with a lot of walls, you actually gain FPS. For a stress test, I downloaded a massive MegaFactory from Reddit user Big Booty Tom. You saw it in the beginning of the video. Flying through that world was fascinating. Conveyor belts going everywhere, but had no clue what was happening. Frame rate there was around 40 to 55 frames per second. That's really low for VR, but still playable. You can move, interact and admire the scale. But yeah, I wouldn't play like that long term. It was fun to look at, but not to live in. One of the biggest influence in graphical settings is global illumination. For another test, I tried out the 10-year anniversary world by TotalXClipse, which you can also download. The links is in the description. His world is modular, aesthetic and beautiful built. Probably closer to how a normal game world might look, not some let's game it out style chaos. His world ran at 70 till 90 frames per second as long as global illumination was turned off. Turn it on and the FPS drops to around 50 because he uses a lot of LEDs for lighting. It's beautiful and atmospheric, but yeah, sacrifices must be made. That said, I absolutely love being in these worlds, so thank you for the creators for sharing that. So my final thoughts. The UEVR Enhancement Mod takes Satisfactory from an already awesome game to the level of a VR timesink. I use the Bobo S3 with swappable batteries, and for the first time I wish I had more of the battery packs. On one day of work I even plugged the headset into a power outlet just to stay in VR longer. Time flew by. For those who are interested in getting the mod, here is a quick installation guide. You will need the game itself, the Steam and Epic version both work, the Satisfactory mod manager from the Fixit website, the UEVR injection program, and the UEVR config profile for the game version. Start by downloading the UEVR Enhancement Mod by Dortmund in the Satisfactory mod manager and click install. Then download the UEVR profile for your game version. Make sure you don't rename the zip file. In UEVR, click Import Config, select the zip, and then close the pop-up window. Start Satisfactory, and once you are in the main menu, switch to the UEVR and click Inject. Make sure OpenVR is selected. SteamVR should also be running first, otherwise it might launch automatically, which can fail. If it works, even the main menu will be in VR. Did you know that there is an Explorer behind you and you have already fixed a coffee cup in your hand? Now you do. So that's it for Satisfactory VR, an incredible experience. Huge thanks to Dortmund for creating such a widely good interaction mod. And thanks for TotalXClipse and Big Booty Tom for sharing their words. My channel is still pretty new, so I appreciate every like, comment and sub you give me. Thanks for watching, and as always, safe travels.